We have so many new cards to talk about. There are 15 new Marvel Snap cards in this video. A bunch we've never seen before, a few that got totally reworked since we looked at them in the last video covering the latest data mined cards. Now, do keep in mind, as always, when we look at these data mined cards, they are absolutely not final. We're seeing that today. A bunch just got revised with totally new effects and stat lines. So some of the stuff we see today may not look like this in the final game. Others might actually show up exactly as we see them here. It's just always good to keep that in the back of your mind. If something looks like crazy broken, it's a good chance it won't be as crazy broken next time around. So that said, let's go ahead and just start moving through all of these absolutely insane new cards like Infinity Ultron. Yeah, this one's gonna be part of the new What If season, kind of thinking about, like, you know, altered versions of cards and characters, which some people are calling a cop-out, but I actually think is good news because it means Marvel Snap has a lot of ways to like revisit famous characters. They could just do a What If season a few times a year even, and, you know, go back to characters that are really recognizable like Ultron, instead of kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel of characters that, you know, most of the public have never heard of. I think it's still good to get those characters in the game to expose people to more different characters, but, you know, a lot of people want to see the Ultrons and the Thanoses and so on. This is a good way to revisit them. But anyway, this is a 5/6 with, on reveal, add 2 Ultron Infinity Stones to your hand. Now, we don't have the pictures of these yet, but we do have a first pass on their stats and their text. And they're all going to be 3 cost Infinity Stones. They're going to range from 1 to 4 power, as you can see over here on screen. There's going to be a 3/2 ongoing. Your on reveal abilities here happen twice, which is basically Wong. Now, keep in mind, you know, if you're playing Ultron on 5, and then you're only going to get kind of 1 turn out of this, but you can use it on each of the other stones. So it's kind of got, you know, like a built-in payoff here with the other stone. The next one is 3/2 on reveal double Ultron's power. Infinity Ultron specifically. So this is a 5/6 that would go to 5/12, you know, which kind of makes this worth an extra 6. It kind of looks like a 3/8. Of course, if you double that again with the first stone, that could be even more stats added. I will say, like, doubling is pretty crazy, but that's not that significant of a play because Ultron's a little understated as a 5 drop, right? A 5/6 is not that big. So, like, in total, you're getting 8 energy for 14 power. Not the craziest result, right? That's kind of like 2 4/7s. So moving on to the 3/3 version on reveal. For each full location you have, give a friendly card there +2 power. So, you know, I guess that's 3 locations at +2 power is another way to gain +6. I did have one reading of this that kind of suggested, like, if you have 3 locations, you give +2 power for each location, which would be +6. But then if you had like 3 full locations and each of them got a +6, that would be +18, which just seems way too strong. So I don't think you can read it with that interpretation. Moving on to the 3/4 on reveal, move the lowest power enemy card here to Infinity Ultron's location. So this one has that nice higher base stat line, but ultimately I think a little bit of a weaker ability here. Probably not the highest utility. Could sometimes make a sneaky play off that, but might be hard since it's the lowest power card. Next up is a 3/1 on reveal, add a drone here and set its power to Infinity Ultron. So once again, you know, kind of worth +6 if the drone is a 2 power drone, as you expect based on the base Ultron drones. Then, you know, that's kind of an 8 power add next to your 3/1, which makes that in total kind of like a 3/9 in output, which that's actually pretty good overall. And note that both of that one and the doubling one do scale with Infinity Ultron's power. So, you know, maybe this is something you're trying to run in like a buff deck or a merge deck. You got a Gwenpool up first on 4 and then an Ultron on 5, and, you know, some of your stones will pay off a little bit more. And then finally, 3/1 on reveal, put a card from your hand here, which obviously that can be really big depending on how stacked up your deck is, or if you're running buffs, you know, hit another Gwenpool target, that sort of thing. That would often on average be worth 7+ power for a lot of decks, sometimes. Occasionally low rolls, I'm sure, but still ultimately kind of nice. So 6 different options here. You know, I think they kind of range a little bit in like output and effectiveness, which is good. You don't want something like this being too predictable, so you're going to just get 2 out of these 6 randomly enhanced. It's going to be hard to kind of predict or control, you know, a deck built into specifically doubling Ultron's power, because you might not always get to double Ultron's power. So you're going to have some inconsistency built into this at a baseline, which it can be hard to build a deck for, but is also kind of nice against the opponent, because the opponent is not going to know what you're up to either. And the unpredictability there is going to give you some real snap equity and just like surprise winning games. Like, you have no idea where you're going or what you're going to do. Do I have to account for that Ultron being 12 or 6? And there's a million questions instantly appear as soon as you play this, which really might be the upside, because I think from like a raw power level standpoint, the stones themselves aren't that crazy. Now, of course, there are other ways to play into the synergy. You know, run a Quinjet in your deck. Suddenly these are much cheaper. You can weave something else into your turn. You know, just having a full board of tokens can be advantageous, particularly because that's built into one of the stones. So these can be another way to fill out the board, having extra stuff in hand, buffing your collector, so on and so forth, right? This is one of those like plug and play style cards that can kind of go in anything maybe, and you're just sort of happy to have a good generic 5-drop that gives you cool stuff to do, but also might have some stuff to play towards more specifically as well. So I think for those reasons, this does look like a nice high utility card that's pretty crazy design, and also just looks really, really fun. Like, getting to play with all these stones sounds very, very cool as far as I'm concerned. But you know, so I am curious, like, if any of these numbers get tweaked a little bit, or if you have a specific path in mind you think where Infinity Ultron would really shine. Either way, I think this is like a just generically great sort of card. All right, so moving on here, we've got Agamotto, a new 5/10 with game start, shuffle 4 Ancient Arcana into your deck, which game start card, I'm really excited. We just did that game start deck. That was so cool. We'll get to add this sucker in. But here are the 4 Ancient Arcana that we have right now. There's actually technically a 5th one that's got like some artwork and stuff, but I don't know if it got cut or what. But for now, these are the 4. That's like a flame one that's like the flames of Flamor or something. They're mostly all alliterative, winds of Watum, etc. But these are the 4 we have. So I don't know if it just got cut to 4 in total, or if you're gonna get like 4 from a 5-card pool. That sounds a little unusual to me. Like, Ultron getting 2 from a 6-card pool sounds more reasonable. So I suspect it's just gonna be these 4 in total. But anyway, we'll see. These are number 1, Temporal Manipulation. It's a 1/0. These are kind of supposed to represent spells more than like, you know, characters on board. And for that reason, they have this banish this text at the end of each of these. So as soon as you play them, they're going to go away. Like, they're not going to exist on board as a character. It's really just like a spell. So it reads, on reveal, give Agamotto +3 power. Put him into your hand if he's not in play. So this is a way to tutor your big Agamotto, which, by the way, is just really big at a base. You know, unlike our Ultron at 5/6, this is a 5/10. Now, notably, right, remember, these are getting added to deck, not to hand. So, you know, you have to actually draw into these, and they do take up a draw. You don't get other cards when you draw these. So a little bit interesting there. That said, you know, they are all 0 power. So I guess something like, you know, maybe a Mr. Negative played into a Jane Foster could just like find all of these and play them all for 0, which is kind of crazy to think about, actually. Like, that sounds sort of nuts, because these do have really, really powerful effects. I mean, you could almost just run that as like a 2-3 card combo in your deck, like no other Mr. Negative stuff, but just Agamotto and Jane and the spells. I mean, you know, it doesn't sound crazy to me. Anyway, so Temporal Manipulation is a way to find your big Agamotto, and he's actually gonna feel pretty good to play. I think he's a 5/10, particularly with +3 power, 5/13. Then you got Winds of Watum. On reveal, afflict an enemy card here with -5 power and move it right. So that's kind of a 2/5, right? -5 to the opponent, and then moving it 2 could actually be rather disruptive, right? Like, lock them out of a position, shift some power on the final turn unexpectedly. That sounds pretty great to me. The Bolts of Balthak is an on reveal. Next turn, you get +4 energy. So that one wouldn't be very exciting, I guess, in the Jane Foster world, unless you played a Magic, I suppose. But normally speaking, like, that's a big old energy boost. Play this on turn 3 if you drop by then. Turn 4, you've got 8 energy. Like, that's going to allow you to set up some pretty crazy opportunities, cheat stuff into play early, you know, get an early onslaught or something cool to do crazy combos with. Finally, the Images of Icon is a 4/0. On reveal, transform your other cards here into copies of the highest power one. And I think to banish this implies that it will not be transformed itself. So basically you'll kind of transform, if it's like a full location, you'll have the highest card and then 2 weaker ones that will each get transformed into the highest card, which does sound actually pretty powerful. Like, it's sort of all in, but if you just have some little tokens floating around early or whatever that you're happy, Cersei, we've seen this before, but Cersei goes from 1 to 2, right? Like, if you got some squirrels there or whatever, 1 to 2 is not a very big jump. If you got like an Agamotto on play and you play Images of Icon, taking squirrels into 10 power is completely insane. Like, that is actually a busted transformation, and you don't even need like a full location to make it worth it. Just having a big guy and a small guy is still going to ultimately make this a big old power swing. Just adding 9 power or something makes this look like a 4/9, which feels pretty fine. So pretty high ceiling, and it doesn't take crazy to make this worth it. So these are all pretty cool. I think each of these has some real power baked into it rather nicely. Kind of conditional with stuff like Bolts of Balthak, where you want to make sure you draw it on time. Images of Icon kind of needs a board setup that makes it worth it, but I think Temporal Manipulation and Winds of Watum are both just universally good cards. I think you're just kind of happy to draw these whenever they both feel like it. And each of these two kind of has like different things to play towards a little bit. Like, is there some Scream synergy here with the Winds of Watum? Do you want this in like a push deck? Icons like token deck, Balthax like a cheese deck. So that might mean that Agamotto can be played in like specific shells, trying to achieve specific things. Just keep in mind, the other 3 cards are also going to be drawn sometimes and make your deck less consistent for any specific singular game plan. So I think you want one deck that maybe tries to capture various angles and utilities here. And maybe that's just kind of like a generic good cards deck where you're just throwing in a great card. I think Agamotto is just, again, a standalone great card. And playing this alongside other good cards is just going to create opportunity, not necessarily playing towards anything specific. So I do actually think this looks really quite good in the scheme of things. You're putting bad cards into your deck, but they're also just really good cards in the scheme of things. Moving on to another really sick card here. This is Khonshu, a new 6/5 big old discard synergy card. When discarded, returns in its next phase. And you'll see over here on the right the other phases. There's basically kind of a waxing moon Khonshu that is a 6/7, and then the final phase is a full moon Khonshu that is a 6/12. Note the logo actually changes alongside the power to help indicate that. And then the on reveal for each of these is kind of the same, but will improve. The first step is on reveal, resurrect a card you discarded to another location with its power set to 5. Which honestly is not great at the base level, but it's still 10 total power. A 6/10 is not good, but it's sometimes that might work at a pinch. You just you need 10 power. It is at another location, so you have some control over it. They're not going to stack up and waste the power on top of each other, but it's a really bad Doctor Doom sometimes. But if you get a card that has some like synergy or other bonus, if it's a Morbius, for instance, and you set its base power to 5, that ongoing will still stack on top of it. So it's potentially going to have a way to get beyond 5 power. But then moving on, it gets much better. The second step, resurrect a card you discarded to another location with the power set to 7. That's a 14 power play now, looking good. And then finally, the final step, just resurrect a card you discarded to another location with its power set to 12, which is really a monster play. That is suddenly 24 power. 12 and 12 in 2 spots is really competitive stat line. That's going to be hard to mess around with. And again, still, I suspect things like Morbius will have additional high roll built into that. You can imagine other cards too that do cool things, have on reveals, etc. on board that are really exciting. So I think this actually looks like a really interesting discard piece. It's one of those that wouldn't be like super consistent to hit because, you need to probably target the discards. But Lady Sif in a deck pushing this out as your 6 is pretty reliable. Moon Knight, this is an even cost card. Well-timed Blades. MODOK just gets everything. So between all those, I do think you'll be hitting this on the final stage a lot. That's nice. I mean, I think this is often going to be a really good just thing to play on 6. You could still actually have like Dracula Apocalypse in the mix as well. It might be hard to do both because suddenly, like your Sif is missing half the time on your Khonshu. Is that going to be worth it? But imagine, a Dracula hitting a jacked up Apocalypse and playing Khonshu on turn 6. Like the power dump there would be absolutely insane. So We'll see if decks kind of lean into one direction or the other, as having this like 6-cost synergy piece for discard. But I think Khonshu could actually upset the Apocalypse in the deck as a new option, because man, that is just an absolutely crazy power dump. It might be built to even extrapolate extra power out of that, like we said, with like on reveals getting discarded and stuff. Imagine, dude, like a Ghost Rider gets discarded and your Khonshu brings back a 12 power Ghost Rider, and the Ghost Rider brings back something else that you've discarded. Like, this is build your own hella right here, but it's just crazy power output. So I think this card looks just so big in its numbers and just consistent enough that it's going to be a powerhouse for discard for sure. So moving on to another interesting little discard card here. This is the first Ghost Rider, which is hilarious. He's riding a mammoth. He's got bone chains. He's a 2/6 with on reveal, discard the lowest power card from your hand, remove that card's power from this. So this is basically a Colleen Wing that starts bigger, but might get smaller, because if you discard a Swarm from your hand, this is only going to be a 2/3, which you're not pumped about that it's smaller than Colleen. But if you're building a deck in particular that's targeted to discount low powered stuff, if you got like Bullseye synergies or something, you won't really care too much, right? I think you'd be fine just knowing that you got the awesome discard, and your activator is a little smaller than you'd hope. Like, yeah, it's okay. You just care about the activator. You want the discard stuff. That's the important thing. So I think you'd be fine with that in some cases. Just having that extra layer of consistency, Scorn's another target for this, etc. But you also have an interesting angle on this where negative powered cards almost certainly, I think, will work to buff this. So for instance, if you discard a green goblin, or let's just say a hobgoblin, bro, I think if you discard a hobgoblin, this will jump to a 2/14. I think it'll work that way. We've seen examples of this in the past. Which card was it? Oh yeah, Lasher. If Lasher has negative power and you activate it, it will buff your opponent's cards. And this is exactly the same sort of thing. So does this just run Hobgoblin and get played out as a 2/14? And you still have cool like Hobgoblin plays. Play a Ghost Rider and send the Hobgoblin over to your opponent. Like, that actually sounds kind of broken, right? Like a Hobgoblin Selene first Ghost Rider deck. Is that a thing? Lowest power makes it possible, right? I think that will work as written. Whether they want it to work that way, I don't know, because the 2/14 is pretty crazy and it feels like not that hard to pull off. So if that works as read, this card is actually busted as a 2/14. I think Hobgoblin and Green Goblin make it into decks, so this is just an absolute monster card for only 2. And then I actually think it's still kind of good in regular discard decks too that don't do the Hobgoblin thing. So I don't know, man. It's not the exact same wording as Lasher, right? Like if you look at Lasher's wording, it's not exactly the same, because that says afflict an enemy card here with negative power equal to this card's power. This uses the word like remove. It doesn't say like afflict this card. So like there could be an excuse for it to not work that way. But Marvel Snap's usually pretty good with like negative numbers and stuff. And if you're removing a negative, that is a negative and a negative, which is a positive. So I don't know, man. We'll see, I guess. But keep an eye on that, because if so, this card is completely nuts with goblins and potentially just good anyway, I think. All right, so moving on here to Strange Supreme. This is a 2/0. Give this +2 power whenever it merges. After each turn, merge one of your cards that didn't start in your deck into this. So this is a way to scale up a 2-drop. If you activate this every turn, I guess it could become kind of a 2/10 if you had something here on turn 1 already, so that it's there on turn 2 ready to go, or maybe more reasonably like a 2/8, or probably often like a 2/6, because you may not have every turn a way to activate your Strange Supreme, which doesn't make him huge from a power output standpoint, but he does have this kind of board cleanup utility where anytime you're like summoning a bunch of tokens, you slam a Squirrel Girl and you got a squirrel that's like taking up a spot, or you have a bunch of Infinity Stones in your Thanos deck, Strange Supreme is basically going to eat one up every turn. He's going to scale up some power. He's going to have their power too, so nothing is lost there. So from a power standpoint, you're condensing your power down into Strange Supreme while still leaving board spaces open, which can be nice for, a deck that's summoning a bunch of little stuff that wants to have options. You know, Thanos decks right now can get around that by like killmongering their stones and playing a death, or sometimes just leaning into it with like Khazar and Blue Marvel and just boosting the stones up. But Strange Supreme might offer a different way to work towards that, right? Like I got a little location to dump a stone every turn. I'm happy he's eating them up, getting bigger, and I'm not losing board space. I still have ways to play out or slam an Ultron late or whatever if I want. It still works just fine. So that's kind of a cool little utility on top of the like power scaling. So any deck with little token generation like that, maybe even Airship decks don't mind a Strange Supreme. Just throw stuff in there, eat it, you know. It is like kind of susceptible to like Shadow Kings or maybe even Shang-Chi's. If you're merging some bigger things in there, he's going to get big pretty quick. So some susceptibility, but still an interesting little kind of utility card almost for those token sort of decks. Also, I guess if you're running like real merge stuff and stacking additional merges into Strange Supreme, that +2 starts scaling up faster and faster and faster. So I don't know, you could do like an Agony deck with Hulkbusters and Spiders and so on, and just try to make this guy really, really big. I don't know if that's much of a game plan, but it is definitely a possibility. At least make him really big, and then Arnim Zola at the end or something, right? And have yourself a little deck there. Sounds bad, but who knows? So this next one is very, very, very sad. I'm putting this after Strange because it's another card that synergizes with stuff that didn't start in your deck, which it didn't used to be. This Eson, let's look at him really fast. He's now a 6/9. After each turn, put a card from your hand that didn't start in your deck here. So like in an Airship deck, you know, this will pull something from hand, slam it next to him, and you'll get some free power and play it. Which, okay, that's fine, I guess. Like, that's cool enough. But man, the Eson we saw originally was so freaking cool. We were so excited about this card last time, and it has apparently vanished. It is no more. He was this big old 6/13 legendary, which we presumed meant, you know, some cards would get a legendary tag, which means you can only run one legendary in your deck. So like if him and Airship are both legendary, you have to pick one. You can't run both. And then at the start of the game, if your cards have different powers, give them +2 power, which seemed like this really cool, like deck building card, like really fun idea. Legendary was such a cool idea too with a new keyword. And now he's been changed to this, which yeah, you know, this is fine. If we'd seen this originally, I think we'd be cool. But man, I miss the old Eson so much. This sounded so sick. Like, yeah, it was probably broken, but man, it sounded fun. It sounded so freaking cool. So this Eson, you know, it's fine. Like we said, you know, slam this in an Airship. You're playing it on turn 5. You basically get 2 turns where he's pulling something from your hand. A little bit iffy there because sometimes they pull things you don't want. You know, you have bad cards in your hand that are scary to get pulled on the board for whatever reason, you know. Oh no, trying to, like a Carnage is in hand or whatever, and it eats the Eson, and you're really sad, right? So a little scary, but you know, there's other ways to play this other than just Airship, where you're like generating cards in hand that you kind of know the results or whatever. So might be a way to do Eson there, but also you do want to cheat this into play as early as possible. So like playing this in a normal deck where you're playing this on turn 6 is probably not gonna feel exciting enough. You could maybe get away with it with like, you know, a Nick Fury on 4 and then an Eson on 6 and he pulls a 6-drop. Like that's often on average going to result in some pretty big numbers, but there are still some 6-drops that could feel rather disappointing in that scenario. So maybe fine to play on 6, probably more reasonable for like Airship where you're playing this on 5, or maybe even something like a Wave where you're cheating this out on turn 4. I guess the question then is, you know, have you had enough time to get stuff in hand? Technically, yes, you know, you play a Snow Guard on 1 and stuff, you're good to go, but maybe Wave and Airship together is a possibility for this, of course. That's fine too. Although Wave is not great with Airship because you play around 3 and you kind of float in energy, and then this is still coming down on 4 when you could actually play this on 5 anyways. It's like only 1 extra turn, but you know, there's possibilities anyway to get this into play a bit sooner. So I think this card is actually fine. Inconsistency and risk are kind of inherent to it with a lot of the stuff we have right now, but it's, you know, it's fine. It's just not the old one, man. This was so sick. So I guess since we just looked at Eson that got changed, we should also talk about Starbrand, who got a big change. This is now a 3/10 with ongoing. Your opponent has +3 power at each other location. So kind of a like reverse Omega Red, I guess, that doesn't have a condition or anything. It just always happens. It's not adjacent locations, mind you. It's other locations, no matter where you play this. that happens. So this is kind of like a Sauron synergy card, right? You want to turn off this ongoing 0 Enchantress, etc. Sauron style build, which actually could bring some life back to Sauron decks. 3 was sometimes a gap in that deck, and this is an awfully big 3-drop. I also think there's some intrigue on this in a Surtur deck, where maybe you don't care too much about the ongoing, because it's just really nice to get an extra 10 power card down. It's definitely worth talking about. We did have this old version of Starbrand, which was pretty sick as well. I think both of these are interesting. Some people might miss this one though. He used to be a 6/8 at the start of the game, plus 2 power for each card in your deck with 10 or more power. So this was definitely just a big finish for a Surtur deck. And now this is potentially Surtur synergy, but maybe more Sauron stuff. In some ways, I actually kind of think this design is a little bit more interesting from a deck building standpoint, so I don't miss this one too much. I do think this has 2 real deck paths. I think even though this is only a 3/4 in a Surtur deck, because you're losing 6 to the opponent, I think that could still absolutely be worth it to make sure your Scar is more reliably 0, because now you'd have 2 3-drops that both make sure you get that 0-cost Scar on turn 6. So interesting. You could also just toss a 0 in a Surtur deck too sometimes, and maybe feel good about it, or combine the 2. Maybe you got Sauron and Surtur in there, who knows. But anyway, this I do think this card actually has some potential. And then the other card which got changed is Firehair. This is now a 2/3. When one of your cards is destroyed, this uses that card's on reveal, which this actually looks kind of nuts, man. Like, play this on 2 and then just misery some awesome on reveals, and then Firehair just repeats those on reveals. Like, that's actually kind of busted. There's a lot of potential good on reveals coming out of Firehair as a bonus. So I don't even know if that's like a destroy deck so much as just a misery deck with like maybe a destroy backup here and there, but I bet you could cook up some really interesting stuff. But getting free duplications on reveals, I mean, you have some big like 3, 4, 5 cost on reveals you could all hit with a Firehair. Just, you know, that's a lot of potential output for just a 2-cost card. So this looks kind of broken, and I think I like this much better than the previous design. Before, it was a 2/2. You can move this once. When this moves, revive one of your destroyed cards here, which was kind of this like destroy synergy that let you like shift power around a little bit with some unpredictability, I guess. Like move, destroy hybrid kind of, but probably not, probably just a destroy card. So that was kind of cool in some ways, but I think this card just looks really crazy. This has some big number potential. I actually like the new version more. So moving on over to some more new cards. This is Captain Carter, a 4/2 with ongoing. Your other cards in the back row here gain this card's power. So the back row, if you look at a Marvel Snap board, right, you have 2 cards in the front and 2 cards in the back row. And we're going to see actually another card which talks about the front row, Dum Dum Dugan and Dum Dum Dugan. I don't know how you say his name. I've read it like 1,000 times, I feel like, but I don't know. Anyway, front and back row is going to be a thing. So those 2 cards in the back at Captain Carter's location are going to have her power, which of course can be scaled up, and then she's going to give that to those cards in the back row. So potentially actually a lot of power output, especially in like an ongoing deck where, you know, you're hitting this with Spectrum later and so on, and just stacking up a bunch of various buffs, maybe like, you know, Captain America, etc. Where, you know, this is kind of a 4/6 at a baseline as long as you fill a given location and she's not herself in the back row, because it does say your other cards in the back row. So you kind of want to make sure she's in the front row, so she's affecting 2 cards. If she's in the back row, she's only going to affect 1 card in the back row because she's taking up one of those spots, and other specifies it's not her. Obviously that would also kind of like scale up forever, I guess. So, you know, there are some requirements there, like you gotta fill up the back row, but in that case she's a 4/6 at a baseline, which is not exciting. But as soon as you start scaling her up, the numbers can get kind of crazy, right? Like just a Spectrum alone makes her a 4/12 because she's a 4/4. She's giving an additional 8 to the back row. Like, that's actually pretty crazy. I could see this being a bit of a powerhouse in a Spectrum ongoing deck. Now, I also saw some speculation that this might work with Sam Wilson, Captain America's shield. I don't think so. Captain America's shield for Sam Wilson very specifically says Captain America's shield. She is not a Captain America. She is a captain, and it does say Cap. But we saw in an answer on Discord too, I think. Like Glenn mentioned, you know, like it was called Captain America's shield because it's Captain America's shield, and she's got, you know, a British flag on her shield. It's not the same shield, and I don't think she'll get buffed by Cap's shield. Happy to be proven wrong. That'd be cool to have a little bonus energy, but I think since that says Captain America's shield, Captain Carter won't make the cut. She is indeed Captain Britain. So I don't think you should keep an eye out for that, but yeah, check it, double check it and see. That would be cool. All right, so moving on to Dum Dum Dugan. He is a 2/2. Ongoing, your cards in the front row here have +1 power. So this is one you want to play in the back behind Captain Carter. Presumably would actually be pretty sweet. And then, he's kind of a 2/4, which doesn't sound super exciting, but, anytime you can extrapolate an extra bonus out of his power, that could be kind of nice. Also, ongoing decks just don't have a lot of great 2-drop options that at least like add power. There's a handful in there, but every time I build an ongoing deck, I'm like, yeah, man, I wish I had a good 2-drop for this deck, which Dum Dum might be. Like, he's actually a solid 2-drop option. So yeah, I think he's not the most exciting card in the world, but I think he actually probably gets played in an ongoing deck because he is just kind of a 2/4 with an ongoing, which is what you care about. We're also going to see another card that cares about the number of ongoing cards you have. So we're getting some real significant ongoing support in the kind of early to mid game. Speaking of which, here's Goliath, a 2/1 with ongoing +1 power for each other ongoing you have in play, which certainly fits the ongoing game plan and Spectrum decks. You want a lot of ongoing cards in play already because you want to get as many things buffed by Spectrum as you can, which makes Goliath a really interesting 2-drop in an ongoing deck. I don't know exactly what kind of numbers you're going to have on average, but I think having 7 to 8 ongoing cards is not remotely unreasonable for ongoing decks. You kind of think about filling up 2 lanes very often. Sometimes that's about 7, and then Spectrum's kind of the 8th card in my experience playing that. I will say Sam Wilson helps a lot because the shield is an extra free ongoing that now not only bonuses Spectrum, but also offers a bonus to Goliath as well. So I think this is kind of like a 2/8 very often in an ongoing deck. And more importantly, it just fills that 2 energy slot for ongoing cards, which might actually kind of exclude Dum Dum a little bit. Like, maybe this one doesn't make as much sense because you just prefer to have Goliath outside of some like synergies there maybe that help. But ultimately, this just looks like a home run, like A+ card for ongoing decks. And I think this one gets played a lot. Also very good for Doom 2099 for the record. That's another way to get even more ongoing cards, which you account for in Spectrum decks. But that last Doom bot does not get buffed by Spectrum because it happens at the end of the turn, which always feels a little bad. It will still buff Goliath. So you get that one little extra tick at the end from that Doom bot and Goliath, which is cool. So anyway, this card looks really good to me. All right, so moving on to something a little different. Kahhori, Reshaper of Worlds, is a 4/6 that cares about hand size. We got some hand synergy here with this on reveal. For each card in your hand, give a friendly card +1 power, which potentially a really big buff, right? If you're playing this from a full hand, you're looking at a 6 power buff on a 4/6, which makes this a 4/12 in total output. It's also distributed power, which actually can be rather nice. Spreading that power out a little bit can be hard for the opponent to answer. You got 6 here, you got 6 potentially elsewhere. It's just a lot of numbers in play for a 4-drop. I mean, if you think about like Gwenpool, right? Like Gwenpool is 6 and 6, but sometimes it's hard to get that 6 in play. Kahhori is going to guarantee that 6 is in play as long as you literally have another card on board. Which should definitely be happening. Now, I guess the question kind of becomes, right, like, how do you keep your hand full? How often is this actually 6 power? Is it usually more like kind of 4 power, 5 power? I'll say that's still pretty good. I think actually if you even hit 4 power off this, you're not mad at all. You're still getting, 410 in total output while potentially playing to other things like a Devil Dinosaur, for instance, on turn 5. So pretty cool for these hand style decks. Could we see a Snow Guard, Collector, Kahhori, Devil Dinosaur little package that's actually really good, just keeping the hand loaded up, buffing up with Collector, Devil Dino slamming some power, Kahhori slamming power. I like that, dude. That's pretty cool. I'm actually excited to play hand decks like this. We always had good hand decks in Hearthstone. Now this is another nice piece for a deck that used to be really good back in the old days. Like Collector Devil Dino was like broken tier 1 deck in the old days. It's certainly fallen off in recent eras, but this could be a revitalization. I'd love to see that, man. This looks good. So next up here is Topaz, a new 3/4. It reads, after you play a card here, move it to the middle location, which that seems fine to me. I mean, you know, Madam Web is kind of nice because you have choice, I guess. And they do sort of work on the same time frame, not exactly, because, you know, if you play Madam Web on 2 and you play something on 3, you're not moving it until 4. But if you have a 1 drop down before Madam Web, you can, you know, immediately move it on 3. So they're kind of the same time frame depending on what exactly you're looking to move. But I think the choice on Madam Web is nicer. But, you know, this is just, it just works. You don't have to fiddle with it too much, but everything ends up in the same spot, which could also be a bit of a pickle. You know, like, are you overcommitting to mid? How are you moving things out again? There's some coolness, maybe like a Hercules mid and then a Topaz elsewhere, but they cost the same now too, which is weird. So I don't know, man. I think this is fine. Is it just clunky for move decks? It's certainly not very exciting. This does actually feel like kind of an almost placeholder text that might get changed in the future. This card just looks, I don't know, unexciting, uninteresting. Maybe this would be like one of the cards that's a bonus in an event or whatever that's not supposed to be all that good. I'm not sure, but at the end of the day, for whatever reason, this one doesn't leave me super excited. I think it's totally fine for move decks, though, all the same. Moving on here to the Hydra Stomper. This is a 3/1 with ongoing +1 power for each card you moved this game. So this is kind of a move scaler for the number of cards moved. So, you know, if you move 5 cards, this is a 3/6. I'm not in love with that. Like, it's actually kind of hard to move cards sometimes. Like, yeah, bounce decks can move a lot of cards. I do have a question about the wording of this. It's not each time you moved a card. It's for each card you moved. I wonder if that's an important written distinction. In other words, if you move a Human Torch 5 times because of your like bounce move deck, is that only going to be 1 buff to the Hydra Stomper because it's the same Human Torch that you've moved? Or is that going to be 5 buffs on the Hydra Stomper? I actually don't know. Like, the generous reading would be, it works every time. A very specific reading would be that it's the same card, and sometimes, you know, Marvel Snap really respects kind of card permanence and references like that. So I don't know if it's the latter and it only counts once for the same card moving multiple times. It's going to be hard to scale this up. I mean, there's maybe a world where you just play this and Heimdall together, and it's like, hey, I'm just going to move 6 cards at the end of the game, and you know, Stomper's going to get big and Heimdall's big, and that's good enough, and like maybe that's okay. But I do, again, kind of have a hard time envisioning this one fitting into move decks as we see them right now. There's just a lot of moving pieces in those decks, and sometimes it's hard to get stuff down. I will say it's nice that you can just play this on 6 and it still works. It doesn't like have to be on board to see it all as an ongoing card. It's just good whenever. That's good. That offers some more flexibility about when this finds time to get played. Some cards, you know, have that early game. They have to be played on time, so this doesn't have that punish. But ultimately, still just, I don't know. I have a hard time seeing this one exactly. But it's at least a cool different spin for move. Oh, and there you go. That's actually all of the cards in this video. So now we're going to go through and rank these from the cards I think are going to be the best to the worst. My number 1 card is Agamotto. My number 2 card is Firehair. My number 3 card is Khonshu. My number 4 card is the first Ghost Rider. Number 5 card is Infinity Ultron. Number 6 card is Goliath. Number 7 card is Kahhori. Number 8 card is Captain Carter. Number 9 card is Starbrand. Number 10 card is Eson. Number 11 card is Dum Dum. Number 12 card is Hydra Stomper. Number 13 card is Topaz. Number 14 card is Strange Supreme. Yeah, there you go. That's all the cards. My God, this video was so long. I think that means maybe we're going to be getting more cards in like the event game modes. Like this month, we're getting 3 cards in the Strange Supreme game mode, I think. And then, you know, maybe future, well, instead of 1 card, it'll be like 2 or 3, and they're just, you know, putting out more cards effectively. So a lot of stuff to talk about, man. Some pretty crazy cards in this one. Definitely some game warping stuff possible. I'm curious which cards you think are number 1, or which cards you think are last for power level. Want to hear all those thoughts and more. Any cool decks you can envision for these down in the comments. I'm always sure there's stuff I missed, so always excited to hear what you guys are cooking up thinking about all these various cards. So thanks so much as always for watching, and I will see you around.